Another day, another live stream. I'm hoping you boys are doing well. As you can see by the title, we'll be talking about the mind and conditioning. And so I've titled this one, You Need to Decondition Your Mind Through Raw Experience If You Want Dates. So, very self explanatory title. And I think this is very important for anybody watching this because as I go through my thoughts on this topic, you'll probably realize that, at some level you might be guilty of this, right? And hopefully, once you understand that you might be guilty of all these different mindsets and behaviors that I'm going to lay out, that hopefully you'll correct them or notice them when they crop up and sabotage your approaching if you're approaching, or for those of you who aren't approaching yet. So this applies to everybody. But yeah, so before I get started, if you don't know who I am, my name's Ian. I'm 28 years old, born and raised in the UK, and used to be an economic consultant in London. Then, briefly worked as a data analyst for an American company. And then I recently left my job to travel. And I started this channel during that period because I was inspired to help guys basically transform their dating lives from zero to hero, because that's where I was at one point. I couldn't get laid to save my life. I couldn't pull a muscle. I was living in severe romantic scarcity, and I was feeling lonely at the time as well. And then I came across daytime cold approach, and I tried it out for myself, got better and better and better, and eventually completely shifted my reality. And now I live in romantic abundance. Currently seeing a girl in London. I've got a few more dates potentially lined up for the end of this week with another girl. So life is looking pretty good in that department. And so yes, I wanted to basically expound my experiences and my knowledge together in order to help guys through this delicate area of life and important area of life as well. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So the mind, right? Deconditioning. Now, it's important to understand that obviously everything is in our heads, right? Everything that we do, the way that we see ourselves, the way that we perceive the world, our beliefs, our perceptions, our expectations, our reactions, the way that we interact with everybody around us, all of it essentially starts from within. So it's important to understand that everything that goes into your mind is directly correlated to the way you behave, which means that if you want to change your reality, if you want to make changes in your dating life, for example, then it really has to start from within. And I'm 28 years old, and so I'm going to speak from my experience, which is obviously I've lived my life for 28 years. I've had ups, I've had downs, I've been at different phases in life. I've been to school, been to university, been in the workplace, met all sorts of different people, had all sorts of different experiences. And all of these experiences have conditioned my mind to think in a certain way, whether it's how I feel about myself based on what people have told me or what I've seen online versus how I feel about other people based on what I've seen them do and based on how they behave. All of this, all of these experiences, you know, leave a mark. They leave a mark, they leave an imprint on my mind, and that informs how I behave. And so this happens across years. In fact, this happens across decades. And so as a result, it's fair to say that over that time period, you've probably conditioned your mind to think in a certain way that actually goes against you, right? And I'm going to specifically talk about the the online content that you might be watching, whether it's red pill content or black pill content. Now, I'm hoping that anybody watching my content is someone who hasn't fallen down that rabbit hole, because I'm not for you. If you're somebody who's very negative, or you have a glass half empty mentality rather than being somewhat optimistic, then this channel isn't really for you, because I want guys who are not in a perfect place but are certainly optimistic about what could potentially happen later down the road. They are optimistic about the future, and they believe that they can make changes towards a better life, especially a better dating life, right? Despite the fact that we live in a modern dating crisis, despite the fact that there's hypergamy, yada yada yada. You know all the talking points that the red pill spouts. And to be fair, a lot of it is based on factual evidence, right? There are studies showing that it's a pretty rough time out there for young men. Fair enough. I'm not here to dispute that. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing to do about it. And in order to get ourselves or to get your ass off the couch and to actually put yourself out there, it requires deconditioning, right? It requires you to remove all the self-limiting beliefs that prevent you from either putting yourself out there in the first place, or they prevent you from being convicted in what you do. Meaning, even if you do put yourself out there, there's always that nagging voice in the back of your mind that says, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, this won't work for me. And of course, that will sabotage the quality of your approaches. And so, like I said, it all begins in the mind, right? And there are layers upon layers upon layers of self-limiting negative beliefs. And some of them may be due to personal experiences in the past, whether you got rejected in high school by that cute girl, or your friends made fun of you for a certain way you look, whatever the case might be. I understand that, right? And that's a part of the, let's say, that lives in the subconscious, and that affects how you see yourself and how you move and the way that you relate to women. So that's based on personal anecdotal experiences, which I'm not going to discredit because those are real. And then you've also got the other part of the conditioning, which is, again, the content you consume. We live in a modern day where there's internet and YouTube and Instagram and Twitter and movies and TV shows. And when you've consumed hours and hours and hours of content over years and years and years, yeah, no shit, this is going to affect how you view yourself and how you view the world. And so once we acknowledge that, then we can now look at ourselves from like a third person perspective and look at ourselves holistically and decide, okay, what I have all these self-limiting beliefs of I'm not strong enough, I'm not good looking enough, I'm not funny enough, right? Based on either my experiences, personal experiences, or what the internet has told me. And so what do I do next? Because, ultimately, I want to try and give you practical advice because that's what I needed when I was first starting out with cold approach. And if I look at my own life, before I got into cold approach, I used to journal a lot, right? I used to journal pretty much every day. I tried to keep consistent with it. And the purpose of journaling for me was to get my thoughts down, to understand how my mind worked. I wanted to, obviously, it was a way for me to basically let go of all the emotions or the experiences that I might have felt during the day, rather than keeping it all up in here. It was a way to just let them go, release them, and put them on paper. It was a very relieving process. But part of the process was also just understanding my mind, right? Just writing down how I feel about myself or how I feel about the world. And I've said it before, I like to read philosophy. I consider myself to be a fairly analytical and deep thinker. So, I like to dive into the inner workings of my mind because I kind of think it's cool. And I like to try and make sense of the world and meaning and why we're here and, all these different, let's say, philosophical, esoteric topics. And so journaling was a way for me to do that, right? It was a way for me to, understand myself a little bit more and put words to my thoughts, my opinions, my feelings. And in that process of journaling over a consistent period of time, I realized that I had all these thoughts, I had all these beliefs, I had all these fears, all these anxieties, all these, negative beliefs, but I also had lots of positive ones, right? And so once I sort of looked at it holistically, you know, ultimately, even though I acknowledged all of these ideas or thoughts or beliefs, acknowledging them wasn't enough to get rid of them, right? Acknowledging them was just the first step. And I also used to read lots of books, right? I would read books on dating. I remember I read a book by Mark Manson called Models. And there was lots of good points in there, lots of good theory, right? Lots of good advice, and the type of advice that is very valuable, right? However, the key that I realized was I need to implement this stuff, right? I need to implement this information. It's not enough to just put it down on paper. It's not enough to just read it in a paragraph, right? I have to be a practitioner. I can't just be a consumer of information. I have to enforce or enact that information. And that's why I say, you know, the way you decondition your mind is through raw experience. So, you know how I mentioned before that a lot of us have had negative experiences in the past that inform our self belief or program our self belief or program how we view the world. In the same way that a negative experience can do that, a positive experience can do the same thing, right? It is almost as powerful, and it doesn't necessarily take that many. However, with that being said, what does that mean, right? That means that when I was journaling and meditating and thinking about myself and trying to understand my mind, the most important step after that was to get out and to basically rebuild my beliefs, right? And that is through raw experience, meaning you go out and you approach, right? I had to go out and approach and see for myself if these self sabotaging beliefs were true or not, right? Now it's weird. It's an interesting, let's say, delicate situation because I alluded to it. Sorry, I alluded to it earlier by saying that sometimes the negative beliefs can actually sabotage you. However, and so as a result, you don't really get the positive experience because the negative beliefs are so dominant in your mind that they just sabotage you again and again and again, and actually you just end up reinforcing it, right? But this is where the self-worth aspect comes in. Like, you have to have some level of self-worth. In fact, you have to have a good amount of self-worth in order to feel confident enough to at least give a to at least give a good go at it, meaning to at least put in a good rep, even if it isn't perfect. And once you put in those reps, you then essentially test whether these negative beliefs are true or not. And that's how you unwire, that's how you decondition your old self, your old beliefs, right? You go into any situation. So in this context, you go into an approach, and even though in the back of your mind your negative beliefs would have you think that this girl's not going to like you, she's not going to stop for you, she's too out of your league, etc., etc. Even though that's the track, that's the mental audio track playing in your mind, once you put yourself out there, go in for the approach, overcome your fear through courage, and then you find out that, oh, she stopped, oh, she smiled, oh, she loved the compliment, oh, turns out she actually likes me, oh, she gave me her number, right? Once you start having those experiences, that's when everything changes. And so it didn't change because I was in my room in private in my journaling book telling myself, oh, girls will like me the way I am, or girls are going to think I'm interesting. No, that wasn't the that wasn't the the big mover. That wasn't the big force or the turning point, right? That was just like a necessary step to lead me towards taking the real step, which is actually going out into the real world and seeing for myself, right? Because everybody yaps online, everybody talks online about women like this, women only like this, you have to be like this. But are any of these guys actually out there in the field, like putting in reps, putting in lots of reps to test these theories? Or are they just talking out of their ass and just saying shit just based off their small experience, right? It's like so many people are just saying, oh, you have to be XYZ in order to get this. But there are so many examples of guys who don't fit that bill. They don't fit that mold. And so what's their secret? What's the secret sauce with them? What do they have that apparently, everybody else doesn't have, right? But the reality is that you are a unique individual, so you just need to go and figure it out for yourself and have the humility to understand where your weaknesses might be, but ultimately, put yourself out there and see what happens, right? Test it out for yourself, right? Adopt the student's mind and go out into the field and see if it works for you. And that's the way that you'll decondition your mind, because you'll have a long set of positive reference experiences that will shift your mentality. And now your self concept will change. Now the way that you view yourself will completely change. And instead of doubting yourself before an approach, you'll start to be confident, right? You'll play to win, not to lose, right? And it all starts from within here. But it's interesting because it's in the mind, but of course the way that we behave and the choices we make out in the real world also affect the way that we see ourselves. So there has to be a practical element to it. You can't just consume. Consuming theory only takes you so far, right? There needs to be exposure. You need to put yourself out there. And then hopefully once you keep on putting in more reps, you'll start to, have a better self-talk. You'll start to see more positives than negatives. And it's a snowball effect. In my experience, it's a snowball effect. The confidence I had when I first started with approach is completely different to the confidence that I have now. And that was literally earned rep by rep by rep, positive experience after positive experience, right? And I kept on breaking down those barriers until I got to a point where now, even though that I still have that voice that might doubt myself a little bit, it's so much quieter. Like it doesn't have anywhere near as much power as it used to when I first started. And that's because I put myself out there and I took the feedback that I got from the real world, i.e. from the girls' reactions, and then I just iterated and I improved. But I had to take a second to really think about, what do I believe and how am I behaving and why do I behave this way and why do I think this way? And then eventually you start realizing, oh yeah, this obviously stems back from all the stuff I've consumed as well as experiences. Because, one thing I wonder is why do some people succeed with the cold approach and other people don't succeed with the cold approach, right? Because I wish I could sit here and say that cold approach is for everyone. And even though I advocate that, you know, most guys try it, I would advocate for most guys to try it, because I think it's a great way to challenge your fears, because this is one of the most universal fears out there. Some people are afraid of heights, other people aren't afraid of heights, right? Some people are afraid of snakes, other people don't care about snakes, right? But when it comes to women, and more specifically approaching a woman in public, in broad daylight, in front of other people, I would argue that most men in the world are pretty scared of that, right? Especially men in my generation, Gen Z. So I'm pretty confident that that's a big fear. Not the biggest fear in the world, but one of the fears that unites us all, basically. So I like to encourage people to try it, just to try and get over it. But that doesn't mean that I think it's going to work for everyone, right? Because I think it takes a certain type of individual who can weather the initial storm when it comes to learning the skill to get good at it. And then once you get good at it, it becomes more fun. Because people say that cold approach is meant to be fun, and it is meant to be fun once you get good at it. But, you have to get good at it first, and you have to embrace the suck first before it becomes fun, before it becomes this cool kind of superpower that you can just whip out on a moment's notice. But yeah, the point is, it all starts within here, right? You really need to work on your mind, and on the one hand, take stock of all your beliefs and really take a moment to think about it. Stop scrolling so much, stop consuming so much content, and just take a moment, whatever way works for you, to just understand, yeah, why do I believe what I believe, and how is this affecting me, and what do I need to do practically in order to unwind those beliefs. And once you do that, then you transform yourself, right? There's so many great quotes that literally always talk about this. It's like, I think Obviously, the Bible says, "As a man thinketh, so is he." That's one. Um, I think it was Rene Descartes, the French philosopher. He said, "I think, therefore I am." Like I think, therefore I am. Right. So it all starts from here. I mean, there's so many, right? And yeah, ultimately, you just need to, yeah, just take stock of your beliefs and then take action. So yeah, and obviously, once you do that, right? Once you do that, and once you've replaced the negative self-limiting beliefs with positive beliefs and through positive experiences, and that's when you start getting dates, right? That's when you start getting dates, because now your energy is positive, now your energy is more optimistic, now you actually believe in yourself, right? Now you actually truly believe that you can give these girls a good time, that you're worth their time, and now you even start thinking from a more royalty perspective, meaning instead of trying to prove yourself to the girl, you start asking yourself questions like, do I really like this girl? Do I really think she's cool? Am I really interested in her? Do I really want to spend time with this person? Right? It's like you go from that scarce beggar mentality to the abundant king mentality of I'm the guy and I get to decide if I want to pursue this any further, because you have options, right? Because you know in the back of your mind that there are plenty of options out there, right? Because think about anybody who's been on a dating app, for example. In your mind, you swipe, swipe, swipe every night, every other night, no matches. You pay for premium, no matches. Oh, then you get a match, but then you realize it's a bot, it's a fake profile. Imagine what that does to your subconscious mind. In your mind, you're thinking, well, women just don't like me. Women think I'm ugly. I can never be interesting to these women. You also condition your mind to think that it requires an insane amount of effort in order to convince a woman to like you, right? And so you walk around with all these limiting beliefs, right? And then, of course, when you put yourself out there in real life, that's the kind of energy you're carrying, right? But then once you've overcome those hurdles and then you've eventually found positive experiences to replace that, then now you go around thinking, no, it doesn't really require that much effort to get the goal I want, right? Of course, with cold approach, there is an amount of effort. There's like a minimum amount of effort required because we are out on the street approaching, and so most women will reject you. So it does take a bit of effort. But if we're thinking about it number wise, not as much in terms of like dating apps, right? People swipe through thousands of profiles and get nothing, you know? So yeah, it's just you just want to, once you've gone over that hurdle and you've now got the more positive leaning perspective, then the energy kind of comes from that, and it shows in your approach, it shows in your body language, it shows in how you communicate, and the girl feels it, and she's more likely to be way more receptive, and that's a powerful place to be as a guy, right? Because now it's like the cards are in your favor, and the odds are in your favor. So, but that again, like I said, that just takes action. I've put in a lot of reps. Like I've been doing this for a year and a half. I'm close to 1,000, and there's guys who've put more than me, right? But I've put in enough to know what the difference is between, who I was back then and who I am like right now. And a lot of it is to do with just the way that I view myself and the way that I view opportunities, and that was earned through the reps. So yeah, hopefully that's useful, and yeah, hopefully you guys keep putting yourselves out there. Of course, that's dependent upon if you believe you're dateable, right? Dateable guys are guys who have the right self-worth, guys who are content with how they look to a degree, not perfectly, but you're content with your appearance. You take care of yourself to a good degree, right? You're fairly healthy. You have somewhat of a social life. You're not a complete hermit, living in the basement and not doing anything. You've got something in terms of a career, you've had a career, or you've contributed to the world in some way when it comes to work, right? And yeah, if you feel that kind of guy and you have a certain level of self-worth and self-confidence, even if that doesn't exist in the dating aspect, when it comes to other areas of your life, if you're fairly content, then yeah, this is for guys like that, right? Guys who are waiting to pull the trigger and are just too afraid to do it, and they feel like they have to fight a mountain of self-limiting beliefs that were, a lot of them were placed by other people, right? Like so many of us just come across the internet and come across these creators, red pill, black pill, and it's sad because we come across that content at a time when we're vulnerable, right? Like when I came across the red pill content, I had just broken up with my ex-girlfriend, and I was obviously in a very bad place. Like I was slightly depressed afterwards, and life wasn't great. I was living alone. It was right around COVID, so I didn't even have like anybody next to me to really help me get through that difficult period. And that's when I came across Red Pill content. And that's not to say that all the Red Pill content was bad or destructive. I think on balance, I would say maybe 60% of it was actually pretty good, right? Like, the message of go to the gym and work out, be disciplined, be motivated, take care of yourself, you know, don't feel sorry for yourself, work hard, have a strong work ethic, you know, improve your mentality, educate yourself, learn even the spiritual side, right? Pour into that as well. I mean, these are all great messages, all uplifting, inspiring messages. And so I'm not here to discredit the entire red pill. But when it came to dating, I think that was quite damaging, especially when it got tied to looks and money and status. That's when that's when it became an issue. And for guys who are in a vulnerable position, guys will eat that message up, right? And of course, we have to take responsibility for taking those messages in. You know, I can't sit here and wag the finger at those creators because I was a sovereign, grown adult man who made a choice to take that message. But again, it's a warning, right? I'm giving a warning to guys to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of believing those ideas, and instead become a practitioner. Go out into the world yourself and test it out for yourself instead of relying on this guy in his room or this guy or even me. Because look, everything I'm saying is also my opinion, right? And it's based on my experience. So you could sit here, you could watch my video and think, I don't know if I don't believe this guy. Okay. But again, just go out and make your own assumptions, or rather, get your own experiences and then come to your own conclusion, right? And the key here is to also understand that just because you've done 10 approaches, it doesn't mean that you have the answers to the world. Guys will do 10 approaches and say cold approach doesn't work. They'll even do 50 approaches and say cold approach doesn't work. Really? Does cold approach not work, or does it not work for you? Because I didn't get my first date until I did about 60 approaches. Now, I could have easily said cold approach doesn't work at approach 30, right? But then it worked at approach 60. So, what's the difference between me and you, all right? Again, that humility, that self-awareness, it's a big part of it. But either way, this is it's up to you ultimately. But I've been in that position where I was consuming theory, I was very self-reflective, to my credit, but then I knew that something needed to change, and what needed to change was action, right? Raw experience. I needed to put myself out there and collect evidence for myself and really get to know what's actually possible, because the world is a big place and you never know what's around the corner. You never know who's around the corner. It only takes one approach, right? One good approach and everything changes, right? And so you never know when that approach will happen, but it could happen at any moment. And that's the positive experience that you need to catapult you to success later down the road. So yeah, just keep at it. Keep at it. Be careful with the content you consume, please. Like, have a good content diet, right? Just like you have a good diet with your meals, you don't always eat McDonald's every single day. Even though it kind of tastes good and even though it's satisfying, that the nutrient quality isn't great, so you don't consume it every day. Same goes for the content you consume online. Are you consuming lots of negative content that makes you feel like a piece of shit, that makes you feel unworthy, that makes you feel unlovable, that makes you feel as if you have to be this top 1% guy in order to get women? If that's the content you're consuming, yeah, of course it's going to affect the way that you walk up to the 9 out of 10 girl on Tottenham Court Road, or in New York, or in some random city in mainland Europe like Barcelona, wherever you live. I know there's guys watching from all over the world. So, yeah, be careful. Yeah, consume positive messages, right? And then act on those positive messages. And then see what happens, right? Anyhow, that's 30 minutes. I've enjoyed the stream. Take from that what you will. Hopefully it's useful. Otherwise, I'll see you for the stream tomorrow. Take care, boys.